Eastern PA COC staff person. Not sure if Lee Howard is on the call with us today.
She's not, Lauren. This is Sierra. So I will be here to check the chat box while you're going through the presentation and let you know if there are any questions as we're going through that pop up.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sierra.
No problem.
All right. So Sierra Carnes is on the line. She's the Western PA COC staff person, myself, and then we have Brendan Allman from DCD. All right, so let's jump right in. Sorry. Just as a reminder, for folks, if you have questions after or before our COVID office hours, to submit them via the survey link we've created. I promise that if we haven't responded to your question to date, there are a few that are still awaiting responses. It's because we're still researching the answer. And we're going to be posting the Q&As at least weekly. So I'm shooting to post a new one on Monday. I posted the first one this past Monday. So today we're going to focus mainly on recapping HUD's mega-waiver and CARES Act virtual office hours that they held on the 14th. So I apologize for being repetitive, but we just want to make sure that folks are connected to the information that's coming out from HUD around the CARES Act funding and the waivers that are available for ESG and COC program. As well as I reposted our Q&A this morning, just a clarification around the FEMA funding. So and I'll get into that. And then the third thing, just want to remind folks that tomorrow, National Healthcare for the Homeless Council is hosting a town hall series about supporting folks' mental health at this time. So there's a link to register for that. All right, next slide, Brendan. So to get the FEMA funding clarification. So in our Q&A that I posted on Monday, I included the language that FEMA included in their March 31st Q&A doc, which includes that they cover folks who are asymptomatic, meaning they don't have any COVID-19 symptoms, but they're in the high-risk categories, meaning that they're over 65 or they have certain underlying health conditions, right? So that's the kind of broader FEMA, what they would cover non-congregate sheltering for. But Pennsylvania's FEMA approval does not include those folks. Our state's FEMA approval at this point will only cover non-congregate sheltering for those who test positive or for those who've been exposed or symptomatic, are awaiting test results, etc. And again, just as a reminder, for this type of non-congregate sheltering, it would really be the Department of Health overseeing and implementing this strategy. Okay, next slide. Okay, so jumping in on Tuesday, not sure how many folks were able to join HUD's virtual office hours. As of this morning, they hadn't posted the recording, but it was full of really helpful information. If you are an ESG or COC program recipient, if you are interested in applying for the ESG coronavirus funding that has come out via the CARES Act, I highly recommend when they post the recording to review that. So I'm going to be going through all of what they presented today, what they presented on Tuesday. So just a reminder, if you are ESG a funded provider, DCD submitted the waiver request to HUD for you. So you do not have to do that on your own, and DCD sent out communication to folks about that. If you are a COC program funded provider, you have to submit that waiver request on your own to your CPD, your local CPD office. You don't have to wait for them to let you know they received it and they approve it. You just need to notify them no less than 2 days before you intend to use the waiver. Okay, you're going to see throughout all of these slides HUD's focus on the webinar was really on what are some suggested documentation for both your files and also each client file for the different waivers. So they highly recommend establishing an emergency record keeping policy and procedure for this time for the use of waivers. They are going to be issuing notices related to the the CARES Act ESG funding, including there's been some retroactive language used, so they're going to specify how far back the funding will apply. Someone asked on the office hours that if someone is living in a COC program funded housing and it's like a group setting, and they need to self-isolate or quarantine, that HUD ESG funding can be used for hotel motel. So HUD ESG sheltering funding can be used. So if you run a COC program, COC funded program where folks are living in a group setting or a congregate setting and someone does become symptomatic or for whatever reason, HUD, Marlisa Grogan on that call stated that that seems like that would be eligible. Big thing around CARES Act, there is no match requirement for the new ESG funding coming out. So just an important reminder for folks who will be applying for any of that funding through DCD's application process. And I don't know if Brendan wants to, say anything about that. I know that DCD is working on creating kind of a truncated application and distribution process to get that funding out as quickly as possible. So look for info coming from DCD related to the ESG CARES Act funds. Next slide. Okay. There's no cap on shelter or street outreach funding, at least according to HUD. For the ESG CARES Act, up to 10% can be spent on admin costs. Historically, prevention was limited to folks with 30% of AMI. They've increased it to 50% AMI, again, just for CARES Act money. Okay, so if you have FY18, FY19 ESG funding for prevention, this does not apply. This is only for the CARES Act funding that's going to be made available. The procurement standards by which you would apply and receive, they're allowing flexibility in that process, as well as flexibility with regard to the citizen participation and consultation requirements for like con plan and how the funds will be expended. So long story short, HUD's trying to make it so that communities can get these funds out as quickly as possible, and no CARES Act funding can be used in programs that are not following a housing first approach. So you can, if you are receiving CARES Act ESG funds for prevention or for shelter, whatever it may be, you cannot require people to participate in treatment or any other activity as a condition for receiving services. Next slide. Okay, so I'm gonna go through the COC program waivers. We've gone through these before. What I'm presenting today is based on the suggested kind of documentation that HUD laid out in their Tuesday's webinar. So I know Lee maybe 2 meetings ago kind of presented what the waivers are. So this one's specific to the FMR restriction. As long as the rent is reasonable for the 6-month period following the date of the memo, then you can exceed FMR. The suggested project level documentation is you have to document why the FMR limit is impeding your ability to find units for a client, keep a copy of the waiver notification you sent to HUD, and keep a copy of those emergency record keeping policies and procedures that you've developed for this time. Within the client's file, you want to keep a copy of the lease that's clearly stating the date it was executed to make sure that you're in compliance with that 6-month period. A note in the file about the date of the memo. Again, this is related to the 6-month period and the rent reasonable analysis. Okay, next slide. Disability documentation for PSH. This waiver, so historically, intake staff, if they observed that someone had a disability, that had to be confirmed with some backup documentation within 45 days. That is waived. Okay, so for 6 months, any program participants who are being admitted into COC-funded PSH, written observation or certification by that person qualifies as disability documentation at this time. You do not have to go back. Do not have to go back and get disability documentation once this crisis abates. HUD made that clear several times on the call on Tuesday. So for the next 6-month period, if the only documentation that you can obtain is someone's self-certification that they have a disabling condition, that is the documentation that will stand for that client's eligibility. So again, within the project, you should keep in your files documentation around how COVID-19 constraints prevented you from getting disability documentation. So which can include, you have a shelter-in-place order in your state, offices are closed. So again, with all of these, you want to be documenting how you're trying to do business as usual, but the COVID-19 related constraints that are preventing you from proceeding according to your standard operating procedures. You want to have a copy of the waiver notification that you sent to HUD. So again, that's that email that you send to HUD no less than 2 days before using the waiver that you are going to use this waiver. And then your emergency record keeping policies and procedures. You're going to see that the project level documentation suggestion for each waiver is going to include a copy of the waiver notification to HUD and a copy of your emergency record keeping policies and procedures. Okay, for the client in their file, you're going to keep a copy of their self-certification or whatever certification it is that is not that third party level certification. So if it's, a copy of that self-cert or the best version of documentation you can get at this point, and a note that is outlining how you applied this waiver and including compliance with the time frame. Because remember, this is for anyone who enters PSH for the 6-month period following March 31st. Next slide. Okay. The limit on eligible housing search and counseling services. So for 1 year, COC funded providers can pay for rental or utility arrears up to 6 months. And I underlined this statement, when those arrears make it difficult to obtain housing, right? So you have to, within your emergency record keeping policies and procedures, outline what this means to you locally. So you have to define, what does it mean when that the arrears are making it difficult to obtain housing? So if you define that someone can't get their electricity turned on because they owe the utility company for months of, they owe them arrears, you want to clearly define in your policies and procedures what is making it difficult to obtain housing. Okay. Reminder that if you are a if you receive COC program funds, this falls in your supportive services budget line. So if you need to, as you proceed, and this is something that's impeding you from helping folks move into housing, you need to reach out to HUD if you're going to be moving your funding around to bulk up your supportive services line item to allow you to be able to pay for arrears. So definitely want to take a look at your budget, and if this is a waiver that you're going to be using because this is posing an issue for folks moving into their housing, you want to get with HUD as soon as possible around amending your budget. Okay, and then in your client record, you want to document why the client's inability to obtain housing as a result of these arrears. Okay, so this is what HUD will be looking for when they come out to monitor in the future for the use of waivers during this period. And again, this is for a 1-year period. Next slide. Okay, so for 2 months, the requirement that rapid rehousing programs meet with clients not less than once a month is waived. HUD did, remind folks, it's not that HUD's saying don't meet with people for 2 months. They're just saying that if COVID-related issues are impeding you from doing so because of a shelter-in-place order, because of staff capacity at this issue, because the people you serve don't have access to phones or technology at this point, they're allowing for this. So very much so, they want people to continue case management as frequently as you are able to. But if you are not, you're going to use this waiver. Project level documentation. You're going to want to document why you needed to use this waiver. So whether it's, again, limited staff capacity, whether it's a shelter-in-place order, whatever the reason is that you couldn't conduct your monthly case management, you need to document that at the project level. And those same 2 copy of the waiver and notification emergency record keeping policies. That's going to be consistent for all of them. And then in the client level documentation, you want to have a note in their files outlining the application of the waiver. So outlining in each client file why you were using the waiver to suspend monthly case management. Because some clients you may be able to, and for others you may not at this time, depending on what the issue is that's prohibiting you from meeting with them. So you want to keep a note in the client files. Next slide. Okay. HQS inspection. So the requirement that units be inspected physically or in person is waived for a 6-month period. But you see, as long as the recipient or subrecipient meets the following criteria, okay, so you have to meet both of these criteria. You have to inspect the unit in some way using technology. So whether it's a video stream, whether it's lots of photographs, so you have to do that. You have to inspect it in some way. Just because you're not getting out and doing it physically, there has to be some record that someone had eyes on the unit and inspected it using technology. And the second is that you have to have some policy in place about how you're going to go back out and re-inspect that unit physically once the COVID-19 kind of measures in place are relaxed. I will say that HUD suggested that if you are using this waiver, that when you go back out to re-inspect the units, you prioritize those where lead-based paint may be an issue. So where you have someone who's pregnant, someone with a child under the age of 6, etc., you want to prioritize getting out to those units first once the crisis abates. Again, you will see the project level documentation is consistent throughout. With this one, if you're using this waiver, your policies and procedures have to outline your reinspection process. So it really has to spell out what your process will be within that 3-month period and how you're going to go out and reinspect units. And client level documentation, that you have in their completed HQS inspection form. and noting the method that you use. So if you used a video stream, if you used photos, etc., and a reference to the waiver. I underlined date because HUD was pretty clear that you want to make sure that everything is dated to prove that this isn't a video or these aren't photos of this unit from a different period of time. So you want to think through how you're ensuring that you're documenting that this virtual inspection took place during that 6-month period following March 31st. Okay, and then you want to have in the client's file the physical on-site inspection and that it was completed within that 3-month deadline after public health officials have kind of waived the special protocols that are in place right now, such as the stay-at-home order. Next slide. Reinspection of units. So for 1-year period, the requirement to reinspect a unit annually is waived. Again, project level documentation, so same to that copy of the waiver notification to HUD and a copy of your emergency record keeping policies and procedures, and then in the client level, a document, a file, a note in their files that their unit was due for a reinspection and that the waiver was applied. Next slide. One-year lease term. So for folks who are moving into permanent supportive housing or rapid rehousing, the requirement that their lease be at least for 1 year is waived. HUD expects that the lease terms be for more than 1 month, but they do not have to be for 1 year, and this is for a 6-month period. The project level documentation, documenting the constraints, the reasons why you're using this waiver. So what was preventing you from securing a 1-year lease? Again, the same to waiver notification and record keeping policies and procedures, and in the client level, a note in their files about how the waiver was applied, why you were unable to secure a 1-year lease for them, and a copy of their lease indicating the term. Next slide. Okay, so we'll get into ESG. Again, ESG waivers, DCD applied to HUD for these waivers, so you do not have to reach out to HUD to notify them that you're using these waivers. DCD did that on your behalf. There were 4 potential waivers. DCD applied for 3 because the one was for HMIS and is not applicable in our community. And Brendan, you can jump in anytime and correct me for anything that I may be presenting that's unclear. So the ESG 3 waivers, the first is the reevaluation for prevention. So there is a requirement that you reevaluate not less than every 3 months for homelessness prevention assistance. That is waived for 2 years. You still have to reevaluate not less than every 6 months. Okay, so documentation for the project level or the subrecipient level. You have to document the need to keep that person housed during COVID-19. So document the need that you have to continue to provide that prevention assistance. The same 2 project level documentation requirements that we've seen in all the previous slides. And then at the client level, a note in their file and a documentation that you are reevaluating at least every 6 months. Okay, next slide. Housing stability case management. We talked about this with the COC program, rapid rehousing case management waiver, but for the ESG program, for 2 months, again, we should be we should still be doing case management to the extent that we are able to, but if because of COVID-19 related issues, you are unable to do case management at least monthly, that requirement is waived for for 2 months starting March 31st. So again, for the subrecipient project level documentation, you want to document the reasons why. So whether it's limited staff capacity, a shelter-in-place order, it could be that your participant doesn't have a phone or doesn't have access to technology to do a virtual case management or a case management meeting over the telephone, whatever the reason may be, a copy of the waiver notification and your record-keeping policies and procedures. And then in your client's file, you want to keep a note that they were affected during this time period, that you were unable to do your monthly case management, etc. So however you're applying the waiver and why for that specific client. Next slide. Okay, and then ESG program, the restriction, the FMR restriction has been waived for 6 months. So for folks who are receiving rapid rehousing or homeless prevention assistance through ESG, as long as the unit is meeting rent reasonable standards, it can exceed the FMR. At the project level, you want to document that the FMR limits how they're impeding your ability to find units for clients at this time as a result of COVID-19. Whatever that may be. So it could mean that you're reaching out to several landlords and folks with maybe units that are below the FMR aren't responsive and aren't offering to rent to people at this time. So of the landlords you can actually make contact with, you are looking at, these units are exceeding the FMR, but they still have to be, reasonable. Again, your emergency policies and procedures and your waiver notification to HUD. And at the client level, you want to have a copy of the lease with the date of execution to demonstrate that you are within that 6-month period from March 31st. A note in their file of the date of the COVID-19 memo and its application to the client's lease, and then the rent reasonable analysis for that unit. Next slide. Okay, so that was a lot of information. I apologize, I gotta exhale. That was a lot of information. I hope that my intention was that the PowerPoint be something that folks can download and have kind of a summary of everything related to the Waivers and CARES Act that we are aware of at this time. So if you have any questions related to that and or any other COVID-19 related questions or discussion topics for the group, this is now our time. If you're on the phone, you can press *6 to unmute yourself. If you are on Skype, you can click your microphone to unmute yourself. So any questions related to today's materials and or other COVID-19 related topics?
There is nothing currently in the chat box.
Okay. I want to let folks know that in addition to the sheltering task force, I think we've shared on these calls that there is a feeding task force that was established, and I've been in contact. His name is Steve. He's coordinating that. So if you are experiencing any issues related to securing food and or meals for the people that you are serving, please share that with us. You can email me or you can submit it in the COVID-19 office hours survey link that's there. I want to be sure that that task force is aware of issues across the COC in different counties and connecting you all to resources to meet needs as they emerge. So if that's something that's a challenge for you, please share that with us so we can make sure that they reach out and connect you with the resources in your county. So on Monday's office hours, we're going to push them back 30 minutes because of our COC meeting that's taking place. The COC meeting is going until 2, and our office hours will start at 2 rather than 1:30 on Monday. And Leah's coordinating having a presentation from someone who's housing in hotel motels. So if there are specific topics or strategies that you all would like us to present on and or to get some other folks within the COC who are doing some creative stuff in their counties to present on, to provide you with some support and our ideas, this is also a time to share that as well. So if you want to know more about a specific topic, and then we can be responsive and have someone be presenting on that in future calls.
There's still no questions in the chat box, Lauren. So
Okay.
Did you, and since nobody's currently asking any questions, did you want to go ahead and wrap it up?
Sure. If there are additional topics that folks want covered in future calls, just let us know. Otherwise, be reaching out via the survey link, and on Monday we'll talk to you around 2 o'clock, and we'll have someone, I believe, from Blair County talk about the work that they're doing with sheltering folks in hotels and motels at this time. Otherwise, be well, and talk to you soon.
Thanks, Lauren, and thanks
Thank
everyone
you.
for participating today. Take care.
Bye.